As soon as you're involved in something entrepreneurial, it changes your mindset. So I just wanted to ask you, in personal terms, how you feel about where you are now and what you're doing now compared with where you were at when you started out on the venture. How's it for you?
It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a lot to do with like who I am as a person, what makes me sort of tick and what makes me happy. But I kind of, it's like still a nightmare. It's still like very challenging. But I couldn't go back either, because I think the change of mindset is it sort of forces you to have a broader perspective. Because, and the reason being that as soon as you're vested in it as both a kind of creative, so someone who's sort of indulging their creativity in something, but also the continuity of that and the success of that is related to lots of decisions you make that may or may not be creative. You kind of, unless you engage that broader set, then you're not likely to. It's not likely to work out. But what that does is it starts you down a path where you kind of can't. You couldn't just go back to being a creative, feeding on a brief set by somebody else that you may or may not believe in the broader bit. You'll just be like, why give me this brief? Like, that thing's the thing that's screwed over there. What's the point in fixing this problem? I can't be bothered to fix this thing because I know it's something else is broken. Well, obviously, when you're the entrepreneur, there's no point in issuing a brief or starting a new product if there's a bigger fire going over there that needs to be solved. So it's just a sort of, it makes life a bit more boring. It's more challenging, working in that way. And obviously, you take the full weight of the responsibility of knowing that if you call it wrong, it could have it could really be detrimental to the business and the prospects of the business. Obviously, there's still that kind of creativity in there as well, which is about saying, if we make it work and if we make the business fly, then it will give more space and more scope for more ideas and more creativity. So there's still a relationship, but you just can't work in the same way that you would do. And obviously, I work with a lot of designers and creative people who are still sort of, in that it's their job to come up with ideas every day, and they have to sort of accept that the framework around them is not something they can affect and question. I mean, sometimes I do question it, but yeah, I couldn't go back to that.
No going back.
No.
One more question here.
Fantastic talk. I enjoyed it and well chaired. Usual one. What was the two things that you do different from the journeys you've been on? Because I think one of the great things that you spoke about was the journeys you've been on. So just to summarise, for each one of you, what two things would you do differently now from where you are?
Fee.
I think I would. Oh, it's really hard.
Change the name to who does that.
Who does that? Yeah, that's what I do.
No, but
I think I probably would have tried to realistically raise a lot more money in the beginning to give us a lot longer runway to then get to a kind of more sustainable point quicker. It was the first thing I'd ever built, first company I ever started. I was, I guess, relatively naive right at the beginning. I think the first even application I put in, the funder phoned me up and said, "Where are you getting paid?" There's definitely those things that I think at the beginning, if I'd raised a lot more money at the start, we could have had an easier time now. And yeah, possibly would have expanded the team faster. I think, again, now I'm at the point where I really need I still work with a lot of freelancers, and I really want to transition that into being a full-time team as quickly as possible. But it's difficult just to build those right people up and that kind of thing. So probably having those people from the start, in hindsight.
Barney, two things
It's tough.
to shuffle the...
Yeah, I think to begin with, I think we tried to rely on external people to help us build the product. For me, I think if we'd have sort of trusted our instincts and gone with our own ideas to begin with, I think we would have got to this point a lot quicker. I think understanding a lot of those processes, instead of choosing to rely on other people's expertise, like using your own sort of creativity to solve the issues to begin with, I think would have been a big help for us. Then I think I agree with the point about investment, sort of getting that earlier on, rather than being in between, in the sort of strange no man's land with an idea and no money or resources to be able to produce it. So instead of I think instead of us waiting around doing small bits of prototyping, I think if we'd have hit the ground running with sort of pitching to investors from the very beginning, I think we'd have been able to start the process a lot quicker.
Nick?
I think just probably some of the, it relates a bit to the category discussion we were having earlier. Obviously, when you're not sort of in a category, it's difficult to work out what you're going to do. There's not many precedents to follow, but sometimes you do obviously pick up on you go through the motions for the sake of it. I think we were spending quite a lot of money in the end going around trade shows to show, to sell to wholesalers and all this stuff. And when you actually looked at what the amount that was costing, we could have been spending all that money on really, really building out the social media side of what we were doing, which actually is a lot more sort of powerful in its what it's achieving, and as a consequence, it's not as developed as it should be. So I think being. I think a lot of the concepts we've talked about are very different. They're very different. They're not just like different objects, but they're different businesses that are oriented to markets in a different way, and they're achieving. They're getting. The channels are different. Everything is different. And obviously, the temptation is a bit to your last point. The temptation. You go to a consultant, and they kind of push you down the conventional paths, and you just spend a lot of money not creating a lot of value. When adhering a bit more kind of firmly to just accepting that it's new. And figuring out what's the if I'm going to spend my day doing something, what's the absolute optimal way that I can spend that time and energy and resource, and what's the thing that's really going to make this work, and sort of spend less time on those sort of things that just end up soaking up so much time and capital, and yes, they sort of they kind of work, which is why you repeat them, but then you realise you've spent a few years sort of chasing this like high cost, relatively kind of mediocre returns scenario, when if you were to put all of that into the stuff that really, really matters, then it would be working much better. So it's I think I sort of regret not being a
Does
little
that
bit
count
sharp on
as 2 or 1?
Two, I think
Two.
that's two.
Okay.